So good morning, everyone from Rome. The presentation that I'll make will focus a little bit on the impact of COVID on local food systems. We've heard a lot about the macro level, how food production and distribution at a global level is functioning fairly well despite the pandemic. At IFAD, we focus on those that are most vulnerable, and particularly those small-scale and family farmers that are in the remoter areas of developing countries. A little bit on who IFAD is. We're a specialised agency of the United Nations and a development fund. We're exclusively dedicated to ending hunger and transforming the lives of those people that are most vulnerable in rural areas. As a UN specialised agency, we have 177 member states. We're headquartered in Rome, but we do have a network of regional offices and country offices across the world. Currently, we're working in 97 countries, and we invest around $2 billion a year in loans and grants. And this benefits, last year anyway, around 132 million small-scale family farmers and rural people. IFAD works in those areas that are most fragile. A large percentage of our investment goes in fragile areas. So in terms of the global context, I don't need to tell you that in recent years, economic slowdowns, conflicts, and climate-related shocks have set the world back in terms of its poverty and hunger objectives, particularly with respect to the SDGs. Certainly what we're seeing is increasing hunger and food insecurity. We're seeing that this is concentrated in extreme poverty and hungry areas in the rural space. We see that fragility and conflict is increasing, and this is all within a context of increasing debt vulnerability, increasing climate and ecological emergencies, and the need for more sustainable technologies and nature-based solutions. One area of concern is that those that were left behind under the Millennium Development Goals will be the ones that appear to be left behind by the SDGs as well, and that is in marginalised communities, mainly in rural areas. So overall, with 10 years until the SDGs, there's some urgent need for investment, and particularly investment in rural areas and investment in small-scale family farmers. The current situation related to the pandemic is accentuating a lot of the crisis and what we see. You would have heard that there are estimates, for instance, by the International Monetary Fund of a lost decade on the back of COVID-19 for developing countries. We've also heard around the need for urgent and increased investment to avoid food crisis, such as a $10 billion investment is needed in 2020 alone in order to avoid escalating hunger crisis. So what is important, I think, for COVID-19 and its impact on rural people and food systems is that it needs to be understood as a cascading health, livelihood, and food crisis, and which has short, medium, and long-term implications. And what we know from other similar emergencies and shocks is it's often the poorest and most vulnerable people that are disproportionately affected. And this is certainly what we're seeing from our network and our partners in the field. The coronavirus and the pandemic is much more than a health crisis. It's definitely a human crisis. And what it's leading to is a dramatic increase in the number of hungry people. The crisis has also exposed the fragility of local food systems. And it reminds us that food is, of course, people's most critical needs. The importance of keeping food flowing to both rural and urban populations at affordable prices has to be a key priority in responding to this crisis. We know that the livelihoods of rural people are really connected, at least in part, to the production, the marketing, and the processing and distribution of food. And we know the food security of urban people depends on the work of small-scale and family farmers. So the rural poverty, urban food security, and the functioning of food systems is intimately connected. We also see that small-scale and family farmers are facing disproportionate risks from the impact of the pandemic, and there's many reasons for this. The fact that many small-scale and family farmers have limited assets and savings to cope with shocks, the fact that in many countries in Asia, small-scale and family farmers are older and they may therefore be at increased health risks from COVID-19. We also know that small-scale and family farmers have increasingly diversified sources of income, including from agricultural labour or remittances. And the disruption that the pandemic is providing to these has an impact on incomes, and that then in turn affects farmers' ability to meet agricultural needs and agricultural cycles. We know also that small-scale farmers in Asia and the Pacific, but also globally, are dependent on their relationships with farmer organizations, with micro, small, medium enterprises, for marketing, for input supply, and often for financing. And if this is disrupted, it has a significant flow-on effect to small-scale farmers. As Dr. Kalibata said, on average, small-scale and family farmers are also net purchasers of food. So any impact on food prices has a disproportionate impact on those people. So in terms of IFAD itself and what we're trying to do in partnership with others, we have investments of around $16 billion in 100 countries ongoing at the moment. And as I mentioned last year, around 132 million beneficiaries that were supported by IFAD, and many of these were small scale and family farmers. We have had increasing demand coming from our member states for support. And what we've tried to do is to think through how we can provide a robust response to support both our member countries and those populations that we serve in trying to overcome the crisis. So very practically, what we've been looking at doing is 4 pillars of our response. The first one is that we have a number of ongoing investments globally. And what we've done in response to demand from our member states is to repurpose some of these investments. And a lot of that repurposing has gone into ensuring that food systems function effectively, going into ensure that markets function effectively so that our target group, small scale and family farmers, are able to benefit from that. So far, there is an estimate of about $110 million that has been repurposed for this activity. We've also had increasing requests from our member states for knowledge and policy support. And this has been really critical. For instance, in Kenya, we've had requests to do some research with other Rome-based agencies into the effects of COVID on floriculture. In Bangladesh, there was some concern of the distribution and logistics around agricultural inputs, which were restricted because of the restricted movement conditions that came in. So working with the government of Bangladesh to ensure that farmers were able to access inputs at critical times in the agricultural cycle has been a key focus for us. As a development fund, making sure that we have resources and financing available as our member states at their time of need has also been a critical focus for us. Another intervention that we've had is the establishment of what's called a rural poor stimulus facility. So the rural poor stimulus facility evolved out of demand from our member states. And what we were finding is that there needed to be a short-term input to aid the recovery of particularly our small scale and family farmer partners. What we were hearing from many of our partners was that there was disruption to value chains and supply chains. There was disruption to the access to inputs, markets, and particularly financial services. The Rural Poor Stimulus Facility was established in April, and it's designed to be a short-term intervention to really try to provide stimulus towards recovery. So there are 4 pillars of that, which you can see on screen. First is to ensure that particularly small-scale and family farmers have access to critical inputs and other basic assets for production activities. Because of the disruption to markets, also making sure that logistics are functioning, making sure that the farmers are able to address sort of post-harvest concerns, making sure that there are a facilitation of how farmers bring their produce to market has been quite critical. Financial services are critical to small scale and family farmers, and making sure that there is liquidity in the system so that farmers are able to access financial services at critical parts of the agricultural cycle has been a key focus under the stimulus facility. I guess that the pandemic has also exposed a lot of the connectivity problems that we have in being able to reach and provide the right kind of support to many small scale farmers in remote areas. And so having and seeing the pandemic as an opportunity to try to move forward how we can introduce better technical solutions to connecting small-scale farmers to markets, to farmer organizations is a key focus. So ensuring that these digital solutions are available is a key focus. So far, we established the facility as a $200 million investment. IFAD has made a $40 million investment so far. We will be able to mobilize close to $100 million to support the facility moving forward and providing support. Importantly, we have prioritized initial support under the facility to our farmer organization colleagues. And this has been important to make sure that they're able to provide the right kind of support, the right kind of services, the right kind of investment to their members at this critical time of need. Obviously, I don't need to tell you about the importance of family farming and the criticality of the role that small-scale farmers play, both in terms of feeding the world, but also in terms of providing nutritious, diverse, and affordable food. We know that small-scale farmers provide about half of the world's calories, and they also utilize a large percentage of agricultural land. So making sure that small-scale farmers are a part of any solution going forward is critical. This also goes for Indigenous peoples and our Indigenous peoples partners. They play a critical role as being sort of custodians over global biodiversity, and making sure that Indigenous peoples and their organisations are represented in any sort of policy dialogue is critical in terms of the COVID-19 response. I mentioned before that the need to ensure that both small-scale farmers, their organisations and SMEs are playing a critical role in supporting particularly local food systems and making sure that any kind of transformation in agriculture involves both small-scale farmers and other participants and partners. There are two global policy opportunities. I won't go back over what Dr. Kalibata said, but obviously the UN Decade for Family Farming and the Food System Summit are two critical opportunities for international dialogue of trying to make sure that any policies that are set are conducive to small-scale and family farming. We're very fortunate that in Asia there is really good representation and voice from farmers that integrates into these global policy events, and IFAD is very proud to be supporting both of them. In conclusion, there are a few, takeaways from our perspective. And firstly, that any sort of policy measures need to make sure that they really address the needs of local food systems, the needs of small-scale and family farmers. This is really critical in terms of the key global policy processes that are ongoing at the moment. Your voice in these processes is really critical. A second reflection is that this pandemic is our latest shock. It has an impact of accentuating vulnerability and accentuating other types of constraints and challenges that the world currently face. It obviously won't be our last, and we need to learn from this experience, particularly with investing in building the resilience of farming systems, building the resilience of local food systems, and building the resilience of small-scale and family farmers. We need to ensure during this pandemic that we keep value chains, we keep supply chains alive, we keep them moving. And this is a key focus for an organisation such as IFAD in making sure that we're making the right kind of investments and ensuring that those that are most at risk of being left behind are not left behind. COVID-19 also, as we see it, it's an opportunity to rethink how we look at food systems. Food systems are broken. Personally, I'd hope to think that they're not, but there are certainly opportunities for us to be able to see how we make them more resilient, how we make them more equitable, how we make them more inclusive, and particularly how we make them more sustainable going forward. And small-scale and family farmers are critical to this, and IFAD looks forward to continuing our long relationship and working with you on this front. Thank you. Mabuhay ang pamilyang magsasaka.